Let me share my story in simpler terms. For privacy, I'll use fictional names. My name here is Denise, and I'm a well-known lawyer in my state. To stay anonymous, I'll refer to my ex-husband as Kevin. Our marriage, once filled with love, ended in divorce, and with it, the painful realization that perhaps our love wasn't as real as I once believed. The turning point came when I discovered Kevin's infidelity. Despite his success in business and my own accomplishments as a lawyer, he looked down on me simply because I earned less than he did. Kevin's behavior started to shift. He became distant, spending more time away and going on frequent business trips. My suspicions grew, and one day, while he was gone, I found a secret Facebook account on his old laptop. It confirmed everything I feared. Kevin was cheating on me with a woman he claimed was more physically attractive than me, as he cruelly pointed out whenever he made negative comments about my appearance. I confronted him over the phone, hoping for some remorse. Instead, he blamed me, arguing that my dedication to my career and lack of supermodel looks justified his actions. This conversation shattered any hope for reconciliation. The final blow came when he dismissed our entire marriage, saying he preferred his new girlfriend over me. That moment, though painful, became a turning point. It was the push I needed to take control of my life and refuse to let anyone, especially Kevin, make me feel worthless. In simpler terms, I realized that I wasn't the woman Kevin wanted anymore. He blamed me for everything, even though it was him who had betrayed our marriage. He wasn't the least bit remorseful, and instead, he bragged about his affair, saying his mistress would make a far better wife than I ever could. His words tore me apart and ended a love that had lasted more than a decade. I confronted him through tears, reminding him of how I had always supported and loved him, only to be coldly brushed aside. Kevin, belittling both my appearance and my career, declared that he had already decided on a divorce and ordered me to leave our home. Soon after, Kevin's friend, looking sympathetic, handed me the divorce papers. I spent the day in tears, mourning the years I had devoted to a man who was now showing his true colors. But something changed when I learned that Kevin was trying to delay the divorce. It wasn't until later that I realized his true motive, our prenuptial agreement. The terms of the prenup stated that if Kevin was unfaithful, I was entitled to half of his business in the event of a divorce. Suddenly, his attempt to drag things out made sense. It was his way of hoping I'd eventually give up on claiming my rightful share. Fueled by this realization, I knew it was time to leave not only the marriage but also to fight for what I was owed. I contacted his lawyer to set up a meeting, then moved out to my childhood home, ready to start fresh and stand my ground. That moment marked the beginning of my journey to reclaim my life and dignity. I was determined to show Kevin that underestimating me was a mistake he would soon regret. I had always considered renting out my childhood home but never actually did it. In the end, it became my refuge during this chaotic period. After moving out of Kevin's place, I sent him a text to let him know he could return to the house, sarcastically adding that I had removed my ugly face and body. Kevin's reply was arrogant, thinking that his lawyer's reputation would intimidate me. I quickly made it clear that I wasn't afraid of his lawyer, reminding him of our prenup and my intention to uphold it. He responded with a threat, saying he would drag out the divorce, confident that I would eventually give up and forego my claim to his business. He insisted that from that point on, we only communicate through our lawyers. Kevin's words only fueled my anger, but they also strengthened my resolve. I couldn't help but feel a sense of amusement at how little he understood me. When I met with his lawyer, Albert, at a cafe, his initial confidence quickly faltered the moment he realized who I was. Though Albert was a skilled lawyer, he wasn't prepared to face someone like me. It seemed Kevin hadn't briefed him on my legal expertise, leaving Albert blindsided as we sat down together. I didn't intend to make Albert feel any more uncomfortable than necessary. After all, he wasn't the one who had betrayed me. I greeted him calmly and addressed his shock at seeing me, explaining that I still used my maiden name professionally. which explained the confusion over our surnames. Albert admitted he had been misled by Kevin regarding the direction of the divorce. As a lawyer myself, I'm trained to ask sharp, insightful questions while keeping my composure. This skill gave me an advantage in our conversation. I could sense Albert's unease, but instead of pushing him too hard, I decided to back off a bit. I acknowledged our mutual connection to Kevin but made it clear, with quiet confidence, that I wasn't going to back down. I was fully prepared to fight for my rights. This meeting with Albert reinforced my determination, not just to navigate the divorce, but to come out of it with what was rightfully mine, all while maintaining my dignity and professional integrity. Understanding Kevin's mindset perfectly, I knew the best approach was to be direct with Albert about the situation. When I asked Albert if Kevin had shared his infidelity with him, his reaction confirmed what I had suspected. He was completely in the dark. Admitting that I'd been cheated on wasn't easy. It stung my pride, but I kept my composure, knowing I had a strategic advantage in this situation. Albert, caught off guard by my admission, fumbled with his words, clearly unaware of the affair. It became apparent that Kevin had been working to discredit me beforehand, suggesting I might make unfounded accusations to destroy him. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of pity and amusement for Albert, realizing how thoroughly Kevin had manipulated him. Despite offering an awkward compliment about Albert being a capable lawyer, he admitted feeling outmatched. It didn't surprise me. Kevin had always downplayed my career and achievements. His failure to recognize my legal expertise or the significance of our prenuptial agreement was just another example of this pattern of underestimation. Albert's surprise upon learning about the prenup only underscored how little Kevin had shared with him, or perhaps how carefully Kevin had kept it from him. I wasn't just there to make my point. I was there to make sure justice was served. I presented Albert with the evidence of the prenup and Kevin's infidelity, knowing it was time to move the process along and close this painful chapter of my life as fairly as possible. I had all the evidence ready, neatly packed in my handbag. With a casual air, I handed it over, confident in the direction the case was now headed. Albert took his time going through each piece of evidence, his fingers lingering over the messages, photos, and relevant documents. When he finally looked up, his expression was one of resignation. He acknowledged the strength of my case, admitting his ignorance of the details. It was clear how difficult it must have been for him to represent a client who had withheld crucial information, especially when dealing with an opponent who understood the law inside and out. Albert told me he would need to reassess his involvement in Kevin's case after our conversation. It was evident that he was considering stepping down, possibly even suggesting that someone else might take over. His hint didn't surprise me, but I chose not to push the matter further. I thanked him for his time and walked away, knowing that things had shifted in my favor. A mix of anger and determination surged through me as I went straight to my office to work on the divorce papers. The sadness I had once felt was quickly replaced by a resolve to make sure Kevin faced the consequences of his actions. It didn't take long for Kevin to break his own rule about no direct contact. He called me, his voice agitated, demanding to know what I had said to make his lawyer quit. I couldn't help but find his frustration amusing. I played along, casually hinting at the importance of honesty and reminding him of who he was up against. Kevin's threats to find a better lawyer and take me down in court only fueled my determination. With a cheeky tone, I advised him to make sure his next lawyer knew about his infidelity and our prenuptial agreement. Without a word, he abruptly hung up. I couldn't help but laugh. I knew he'd struggle to find a lawyer willing to take his case, especially with my reputation in the legal community and the solid evidence I had on my side. As I had predicted, Kevin eventually came crawling back, likely to negotiate. His arrogance had trapped him, and now he was forced to face the reality of the situation. I was ready for whatever came next, confident in my position and the legal standing I had carefully built. Kevin's underestimation of me had sealed his fate, and I was determined to see this through to the end. ensuring that justice was served in my favor. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, I was startled by a knock at the door. It was an unexpected visitor, especially at such an early hour. When I opened the door, I was taken aback to see Kevin standing there, looking defeated and worn out. Despite my surprise, I let him in, wanting to avoid any public scene. I immediately made it clear that I wasn't interested in a lengthy conversation and reminded him that we had agreed to communicate through lawyers. Kevin, looking desperate, confessed that he hadn't yet found a divorce lawyer. I found this particularly ironic, considering how quickly he had moved on with his mistress. He then tried to accuse me of sabotaging his efforts to find legal representation, a claim I found utterly absurd. I couldn't help but laugh at his ridiculous accusation and calmly explained that his actions, his infidelity and the deceit surrounding the prenuptial agreement, were the real reasons behind his difficulty. It seemed Kevin finally understood the weight of his dishonesty and how it made him an undesirable client for any reputable lawyer. But by then, it was too late. The terms of our prenuptial agreement, one he had insisted on, were clear, and now they worked against him. Kevin had hoped to find a legal loophole or delay the proceedings long enough to convince me to forfeit my rightful share of his business. He had seriously underestimated my resolve and the respect I command in the legal community. His last-ditch attempt to appeal to my sympathy, by crying and pleading for me to leave his business intact, was both pathetic and telling. He begged me not to enforce the clause that entitled me to half of his business in the event of his infidelity, a clause he had eagerly included when we signed the prenup. Despite his pleas, I remained unmoved. His shallow apology, laced with half-hearted remorse, couldn't undo the pain and disrespect he had caused. Kevin's mistake was not just his infidelity, but his failure to understand my strength and my determination to uphold my rights. I was firm in my decision to claim what was rightfully mine, not just for the sake of justice, but as a reflection of my self-worth and the consequences of his actions. Kevin's suggestion that we reconsider our marriage, under the pretense that overcoming this challenge would somehow make us stronger, was almost laughable. His audacity knew no bounds. The idea of reuniting after everything, his ongoing affair and the evident dissatisfaction it brought him and his mistress, was absurd. I had learned my lesson from marrying him and was not about to make the same mistake again. His sudden desperation to reconcile was transparently motivated by his fear of losing half of his business in the divorce. I couldn't help but express how delusional his suggestion was. I had come too far in life to be naive enough to fall for his manipulations again. I knew his motives weren't about reigniting old love but about protecting his assets. His promises to end things with his mistress and his pleas to overlook his mistakes for the sake of our happiness didn't sway me. I saw this as my opportunity to escape a marriage that had always been a facade. I was grateful that his true nature had been revealed before any children were involved. I stood firm in my decision. His pitiful begging for me not to claim my rightful share of his business only strengthened my resolve. It reminded me of the pain he had caused me, and seeing him now at his lowest felt like the retribution he deserved. I ignored his attempts to win me back, keeping my focus on starting anew. Far from his drama, with the divorce already in motion, I enlisted a colleague to represent me, ensuring minimal direct interaction with Kevin. Despite his persistent efforts, Kevin eventually realized the futility of his position. Knowing full well the embarrassment a court battle would bring upon him, he sought a lawyer for a straightforward settlement. The reality of his situation, facing further legal expenses and knowing the prenup left him with little room to maneuver, was undeniable. Kevin agreed to a mutual division of assets. The prenup, which clearly outlined the consequences of infidelity, meant he had to forfeit half of his business to me. Reluctantly, he complied. We even offered him the chance to buy out my share, but his finances were in disarray, primarily due to his extravagant spending on his mistress. She, realizing that his wealth was running dry, had cut all ties with him. It seemed her opportunistic nature had finally caught up with her, leaving her isolated in the aftermath of his downfall. As for Kevin, Losing half of his business had a profound impact on his lifestyle. Unable to keep up with the financial strain, he was forced to sell his house, which he could no longer afford, and downscale to a modest condo, a stark contrast to the lavish life he once enjoyed. Despite these setbacks, he made a feeble attempt to reconcile with me, likely hoping that doing so would restore his fortunes. But that ship had long since sailed, and I had no intention of revisiting our past. Meanwhile, my situation improved dramatically. I handed over the management of Kevin's business to a trusted and capable individual, and under their stewardship, the business is thriving. Coupled with the income from my successful legal practice, my financial position allowed me to upgrade my lifestyle significantly, including the purchase of a new mansion. This transformation not only improved my living conditions but also reinforced my resilience and strategic thinking throughout this entire ordeal. This chapter of my life has underscored a deeply satisfying reversal of fortunes. Rather than falling prey to Kevin and his mistress's manipulations, I emerged victorious. My life has flourished while their reckless decisions have led to their downfall. It's a reminder of the truth behind the saying, "What goes around comes around." In this case, justice, and a touch of poetic justice, prevailed, rewarding my perseverance and sharp decision-making with the life I deserve.